Hey, it's Mr. Sorensen, and we are here today to work on the last drawing of our box project, the dresser box project. So we've looked at the front view, the top view, and the side view of the box itself. We should be able to build that with the working drawing that we've created. But now we need to look at the lid. The lid is a separate item from that. And you see the beginnings of that behind me on the board. Now, as we get started on this lid project, this is the part of the box where you're going to have the most input. I'm going to show you how to kind of get the basic shape laid out, and then you're going to do design. You're going to design the parquetry pattern that becomes the lid. So there's three words that I want you to keep in mind as you work on this project, because these are the rubric. These are going to be part of the rubric. This is what's going to earn you the A. Number one, symmetry, right? These are words that we've looked at in our shop talk. Symmetry means I got a line right down the middle. Whatever is happening on the left side is exactly the same on the right side. So for an A, you have to create symmetry within your lid somehow. Number two, as you create your lid, you need to create a pattern. Right? You got to create a pattern in it. Pattern means it's not random. It can't be random colors that just kind of go every which direction. A pattern is a pattern is a pattern. Okay? What is a pattern made up of? Number three. A pattern is made up of repetition. So if I have blue, green, then on this side I have to have blue, green, right? A pattern needs repetition. So those are the three main features that I'm looking for in your parquetry project that you're going to do on your lid. Now, a good reference would be the other project that you made, right? We looked at Pinterest.com and we looked at some wall art. All of those things will be helpful because we're trying to create a similar looking project just on a bigger scale that becomes the lid of this box. So let's get started in drawing out the lid of our dresser box. So behind me on the chalkboard you see these four little starting points. Just like on our other projects, we're just going to simply take the ruler and connect the dots. Remember, we want to have a ruler, a pencil, an eraser, maybe some tape. We want to tape that drawing down so that it's flat while we're working on it. Alright, so there we go. That should look something like that. This is the overall size of our lid. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to measure in on all four sides. I'm going to measure in 5/16 of an inch. 5/16 of an inch, and I'm going to put a dashed line all the way around. So right, 5/16 of an inch is exactly like what it sounds like. 5 marks on your ruler. Measure in 5/16, put a mark. Measure in 5/16, put a mark. I'm going to turn my ruler horizontally. And I'm going to connect this with a dashed line because this represents the groove. There's going to be a groove cut in a frame. The frame is going to frame out this little piece that we're going to make at home, this parquetry project that we're going to make. So right now what I'm doing is I'm drawing the groove. So you can't see this line from the outside, which means I draw it with a dash line. Now I'm going to turn, measure over 5/16, measure over 5/16, draw a line. And I'll just work my way all the way around. All right, so I'm going to do something like that. Now I'm going to measure down. I'm going to do basically the same thing. I'm going to measure down a 1/2 inch. On the left, I'm going to measure in a 1/2 inch on the right. This time I'm going to draw a solid line all the way across. This is going to represent the frame, right? There's a frame that goes all the way around this and frames out this pattern that you're going to create here. So I'm going to measure in a 1/2 inch on the left, 1/2 inch on the right. A 1/2 inch is 8 marks on your ruler. Now I'll do the same thing coming down the right side. Measure in a 1/2 inch at the top, 1/2 inch at the bottom, draw a solid line. A solid line all the way down the left side. So now what we have here represented on the drawing is a frame, like a picture frame that goes all the way around. And like we saw in our box front and side view, we see a groove. There's a groove cut into these 4 frame pieces that's about 3/16 to a 1/4 inch deep. Now, the frame meets at the corners with a miter. It meets at the corner with a miter. That's a 45-degree angle. So I'm just going to draw a line from this corner down to this corner. Like that. So there's our miter. And I'll come around and I'll do that on all 3 corners. There we go. So we got a frame, like a picture frame, mitered at each corner. Miter is a 45-degree angle, like you made on your joint display board. In each of those pieces that make up the frame, there's a little groove, and that groove is where we're going to put this parquetry project that you're now going to design. All right, now with my lid, looking down at the top of my lid drawn, we need to add our dimensions here. So I'll start by drawing some extension lines. I'll come off of the left side over here with 2 extension lines. I'll come off of the top. And remember, the extension lines do not touch the object lines, right? This is the object. That's our lid. It's drawn with object lines. Theoretically, those lines should be darker. Extension lines are a little bit lighter, and they do not touch the object itself. So the outside to the outside dimension of my lid is 9 3/4. Let me go ahead and put my dimension lines in here. 9 3/4 inch is the overall length of my lid. Now, I'm going to dimension 2 items here, so I want these extension lines to go out a little bit further. To start with, I want the overall size of the box, which is 5 1/4. So I'll put that way out here on the edge. My dimension lines, remember, have arrows. They touch the extension lines coming out the side. Now, the other thing I want to dimension here is my substrate, right? I have this substrate panel in here that I'm going to put a carpentry project on. I'm going to make a pattern on it. That's going to become the embellished lid of the box. So I'm going to put an extension line. I'm going to extend the dash line out. Like that. So I come around, I don't touch it, but I extend the dash line out. And then I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. Down below, I'm going to extend the dash line out. Like that. Then I'm going to turn my dimension line, and the substrate, this piece of plywood that's going to hold the picture or the pattern, is about 4.5 inches in width. Now I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to extend my plywood. I'm going to extend the dash line down here. I'm going to extend the dash line down here and show how big that piece of plywood is in length. Now, next we're going to be putting a grid on here so we can plan our carpentry project. So I'm going to do these next couple of dimensions down below the project. I'm not going to use the surface here, even though it's open, I'm not going to use it for any dimensions because we need to use that for something else later. So I want to mark here the thickness of my, the thickness of the frame. Right there on the inside of the frame. The second arrow, which opposes it, is going to be right here on the outside of the frame. I'm going to bring it down and let me adjust the camera so you see it better. Alright, here's the opposing arrow. And now I'm going to put my leg down here so I can light it. That on the area, there's a lot of space in here, so we can actually and also, right here next to it, I'm going to show how so, like this arrow here, and this arrow as well. The opposing arrow this time goes all the way up to the dash line. The dash line represents the notch, and so this is now, the distance between the two arrows is about 3/16. It's telling me that the depth of the notch is 3/16 of an inch. So I'll put my arrow there, put my leg out here. .3/16 of an inch. Now the last thing that I can do, and this is probably a good view to do it from, I'm just going to bring an arrow down like that. Again, I don't need to go into it much, just a little bit. And then down here I'm going to be able to write in that this is 1/4 inch MDF. Okay, so 1/4 inch MDF width. This little symbol, a W with a slash under it, means width, oak veneer. So that means we've got a piece of MDF, but it's veneered, thin, really paper thin wood is glued on the outside edges of it. So when you look at it from the outside, it looks like a piece of oak, but really on the heart, the inside of it is actually MDF. That way when you open your box and you look at the box, you see solid hardwood. It looks like all the other wood on the top that you're making your pattern out of, only it's a less expensive and a more stable piece of wood that makes up the panel that'll be inside the frame. Well, that takes care of the top view of my lid. We're going to come back and we're going to add a grid to this and do some design on it. Let's come over here real quickly and draw in our side view. This just is going to show us how the substrate is going to fit into the frame. So the first thing I'm going to do over here on the side view of the frame is I'm just going to measure in a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to measure in a 1/2 inch. I'm going to draw a line across, right? So I have a 1/2 inch frame and a 1/2 inch frame on the top and bottom. And I'll do this relatively light till I'm ready to darken it in. All right, so there's my 1/2 inch piece across, 1/2 inch piece across. Now, right down the middle is where the substrate and the picture, the pattern that you're going to create using the hardwoods is going to sit. So the first thing I want to do is just find the center line here. On your drawing, this piece is 7/8 of an inch wide. So what's 1/2 of 7/8? Well, it's a little tricky, 1/2 of 7. It's harder to find the center of a odd number. So here's the corresponding fraction. On a ruler, the cool thing is that 7/8 has another fraction that it can be called by, another number it can be called by. 7/8, if I look on an inch, 7/8 lines up exactly with 14/16. 14/16, the nice thing about 14/16 is that the number on top is now an even number and I can divide it in half easily. 14 divides in half. 14 divided by 2 is 7. So that's a better way to do it, right? So on this piece right here, you're going to measure over 7/16. That should be the center. Then I'm going to come down here to the bottom of it and do the same thing. Measure over 7/16 and find the center. Then I'm going to turn my ruler vertically like that and just draw a light line. Now, the center mark right now is just helping me do some additional work. I can come back in and darken things in later. So the substrate, as we wrote over here on the top view, the substrate, the plywood that's going to have our picture glued to it is 1/4 inch MDF, 1/4 inch. The hardwood that you have is 1/8 of an inch thick, 1/8 of an inch. plus 1/4. 1/8 plus 1/4. Now, if you're not good at that, here's a better way to do it. 1/4 of an inch also is known as 4/16. 1/8 of an inch is known as 2/16. 4 plus 2 is 6/16. Now, that's great. 6/16. That's how thick the little strip down the middle is going to be. That's how thick the back plus your picture, your pattern is going to be 6/16 thick. So 6/16 can be divided in half very easily. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So now we're going to come back and make use of our center line. I'm going to measure over 3/16 on the right side of the center line and 3/16 on the left of the center line. 3/16 on the right, 3/16 on the left. So it's going to look something like that. Now I'm going to turn my ruler. Now I have to come back and remember, so I'm trying to look at this, I'm looking at the outside of the box. I cannot see into the panel in the middle, not from the edge anyway. So this would be done in dashed lines. Scoot it over, dashed lines again. All right, and there's the panel that runs down the center of the lid. Now, the center line is also dashed, right? Yes, it's there. That's the separation between the hardwood pieces and the backing. But you can't. But from this view, you can't see it. It would just be a dashed line there as well. So I can come back in with my eraser and erase some of those marks. So as we complete this, let's just remember back over to the inside of our box, right? Remember, the inside of all of these things that we're building, these are frame and panel, they all have a groove. The bottom fits in the groove. Well, the same thing is true here. The frame is going to have a groove in it that your pattern is going to fit into. So what we said down here was that the notch, the little groove, is about 3/16. So I need to measure up here about 3/16 into the frame. And I'm going to come down here and measure from the bottom right here down 3/16 into the frame. Let me bring you in closer so you can see what I'm doing. All right, we're working right here on this little part. Now, right here, these dashed lines coming up like this all the way to the top, these dashed lines right here represent the backing material and the hardwood material that you just picked up in your kit. We're going to have this little rectangle. It's going to sit in a frame, right? And over here on our other drawing, we can see a frame that goes all the way around this panel. So right here, this represents the frame, the wooden 1/2 inch thick frame. There's a groove in it. How do we draw that groove? The groove lines up with the material right down the center. I'm just simply going to measure up about 3/16, put a mark, come over here, measure up 3/16. Remember, 3/16 is 3 marks on your ruler. And then I'm going to bring this line up till it touches there, bring that across, bring that back down. Okay, so it'll look something like that. This line right here also has to be dashed. That line that goes across, that's the 1/2 inch thick frame, but on the outside you can't see it. You can't see it. So I'll come in and make sure that line is dashed as well. Now I can also darken this stuff in because this is basically finished now. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to measure down 3/16 of an inch, come over here, measure down about 3/16 of an inch, and then I'm going to extend this groove down into the bottom frame. There it is. So there's a groove all the way around the frame that holds this bottom, this panel, this decorative panel that you're in the process of making. So that's all we need right here. Let's go ahead and add our dimensions. let's now start adding our dimensions for this side view. So I'm going to put an extension line up, put an extension line up. I'll do my dimension lines between it, or actually my space, because my chalk is so big, I'm going to put my lines on the outside, but you may be able to do it on the inside since you're using a teeny pencil lead. And this, on your drawing, this is 7/8 of an inch. 7/8 of an inch. Extension line, extension line. Remember, the extension lines don't touch. Extension lines don't touch if you have to use your eraser. And I'll put my dimension line, the arrow, now the dimension here should be the same as the dimension here. So that's 5 1/4. And I realize on your drawing it's done a little bit bigger, which is okay. It's just helping us have more room to work on and draw it, and so it's not quite so tiny. Our overall panel in the middle is about 6/16 or 3/8 of an inch thick. So we're going to do this. We'll put a line like this. I'm going to go from the dash line out, and I'm going to come here from the dash line out, like that. Put an arrow. So the arrow is pointing to the thickness of this little panel down the middle. And then I'm going to put a leg on it, and that is 3/8. That tells me how big I need to cut the slot, the groove that runs through the middle of this to hold the panel. I know how deep it is in each of the pieces because it tells me that over here on my top view. I can do the thickness of the frame. So let's just add that right here. I'm going to do an extension line like that. I'll come up here to the dash line. I'm going to come up to the dash line right there. Do an extension line out. And then put an arrow. Right, directly opposing it, put another arrow, a second arrow. And then I'm going to put a leg here, and I'm going to write 1/2 inch. And I think that does it. I think it gives us everything we need. We could do another side view of the lid, but it's exactly the same, only a little longer. I think we've got the idea down, and we're going to move on now to creating our design so we can actually build this dresser box. So the next thing I need to do here is I'm going to lay out a grid so that I can design my parquetry project. So the grid is going to start in the center. So your project is from this corner right here, right, from the dash line in this corner to the dash line over in this corner. If you measured it all correctly, it should be 9 inches. 9 inches. Half of 9. Half of 9 is 9 divided by 2, 4.5. 4.5. So I should be able to measure over from this corner 4.5, and then measure over from the mark that I put here 4.5, and it should fall out right on that corner. So measure over 4.5 on the top, measure over 4.5 on the bottom, and I'm going to put a line, a light line, right? This grid is just light, it's background. It's going to give me the ability to map stuff out, but I don't want the grid to be like really dark. Now I'm just going to lay out 6 marks that are exactly 3/4 of an inch away from each other. Measure over 3/4 of an inch, then measure over 3/4 of an inch, then measure over 3/4 of an inch. 3/4 of an inch is 12 little marks on your ruler. So if you're unsure of how to find 3/4 of an inch, then you just measure over, you count 12 marks, put a line. Count over 12 marks, put a line. In the end, you should end up with 6 on this side of the center and 6 on this side of the center. All right, so I've put, 6 little squares, 3/4 inch marks on that side, 6 3/4 inch marks on this side. Now I'm going to come down the bottom and do the same thing across. All right, now I'm going to turn my line, my ruler vertically, and I'm just going to draw light lines, vertical lines all the way across. Very light. I just want to see this grid. All right, so there's my vertical lines. All right, well, what you see behind me looks a little bit like a football field. I've got all my vertical lines drawn 3/4 of an inch spacing all the way across. Now I'm going to do the same thing on my horizontal axis. And remember, I'm trying to draw from the center out so that it's equally spaced. There should be approximately 3 strips going up and 3 strips going down. I have them laid out on the right side over here. Now I'm going to lay them out on the left. Then I can draw my horizontal line. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my horizontal lines across here, and I'll join you in a minute. I now have a grid drawn on my paper, or in my case behind me on the board. My next job is now design. Like we did on our wall art project, I want to go to Pinterest.com, type in the word wall art, and I want to look for some ideas on creating a pattern. Now the key in this particular project that you're going to see in the grading rubric are pattern, symmetry, and repetition. Pattern, symmetry, repetition, not to mention sanding and attention to details. These little pieces should sit neatly next to each other. There shouldn't be any gaps. There shouldn't be any splinters sticking out. A pattern means repetition. I noticed on a lot of our projects last time, there just were like random colors put down. That certainly is a way to do it, but that is not this project. This project is asking you to create a pattern, which means now I have to have repetition and I have to have symmetry, right? So that means whatever I choose to do on the right side of my box across the center line, it has to be mirrored over there. So I need to remember that because that's what my grade is going to be based on, not just the fact that I put some pieces of wood down and made a lid, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start thinking about what I want to do here. In your wood bundle, you have a dark color like purple, brown, dark brown, and orange, where you have two of the same color. You have more of that, so you can do your main feature throughout your pattern with that color, and hopefully you have enough. That means you have 2 strips. I have enough to do 2 of these strips with those colors. Then I have 2 light colors, so light and dark contrast. That's good for making a pattern. Then I have some other stuff that I can be adding in. So I'm going to think about what I like to do here. When I look at this, what I see is I see a square right there. So I'm going to change, and I would recommend doing this for you, either texture or color. If you have crayons, colored pencils, that could be erased as I plan it. I'm going to just put a different color here. Okay, so here's why planning works best on a sheet of paper, because I drew that on the wrong squares. Now, when I did my wall art project, I had the same problem. I noticed later, like, oh, my pattern got off. So it is important to practice. Do it on the paper first before you try doing it on your board. So maybe I will do that purple. Then I'm going to come over here. I'll do that purple. Right? And again, I'm thinking to myself, square. What if I built a square on here? And here I'm going to go this way. And with my chalk, I'm trying to create the grains of the wood. I can see which direction is the grain going, right? The grain should always run the longest direction of the board. Unless I'm going to make a checkerboard pattern, if I have a piece of wood that I want to cut 2 or 3 squares long, the grain has to run that direction. That looks better than cutting 3 little pieces that have the grain going across the piece. Up here, same thing. All right, so there's the feature. I'm going to do one here, and so I got to remember now. I got to repeat that over here. That symmetry across my center line. I have to take that and replicate it on this side. Now, for time's sake, I'm just going to draw half of it, and then just note that when I build a box, I'm going to replicate that a second time on the other half of the center line. All right, so there's my square. Now I have another idea. Something like that. So I've put 4 triangles in the center of that square. All right, so in the center of this square, I'm going to have 4 triangles all pointing towards the center. Now that leaves me with this bigger rectangle out here, or square out here, and I think I'll just make that a different color of wood. Now, I may or may not have enough wood for that, right? One of my design criteria, one of the design limitations is that I've got this limited amount of wood. So could I make a square that big all the way around? And then another, the same color all the way around over here? I don't know, maybe not. I'm going to practice that with my practice strips once I get this figured out. I'm going to practice it here, and if I realize I don't have enough, then I'm going to have to do some sort of checkerboard around this edge in order to have enough material to make it work. All right, well, you get the idea. Now there's my layout, right? I'm doing it on the chalkboard, you're doing this on your piece of paper. I'm going to mirror that on this other half so that I've got this pattern replicated, right? There's my 2 words. symmetrically. That means over the center. It can't be over this way too much or over that way too much. It has to be over the center. This isn't the final thing, right? Because again, after I practice it, I might find, hey, there's not enough wood to make that big square right there out of a single color. So then I'm going to have to come back and maybe checkerboard that. That's what I'm thinking I'm probably going to have to do. All right, well, I want you to spend some time now working on yours. I'll do a little calculating here. I want you to work on yours, and we'll come back and take a look at what to do next in a few minutes.